Hey everybody, welcome to Business as Usual. Happy Friday. So glad to have you here. This is Jonathan Kirchting from the Pittsburgh Tech Council. I'm filling in for Audrey Russo today, and we got a terrific show in front of us with Gerardo Interiano from Aurora. Very exciting to have him on the show today. We got lots of great questions for him. But as always, before we get to our guests, we set the ground rules, as Audrey always does, just to remind everybody that your mics have all been muted just so we can keep the background noise. I will apologize ahead of time of my background noise because I have two dogs that like to bark their heads off at about this time every day. It's perfect timing for our show. So if you hear any dogs barking, they're mine and it's going to be okay. And we got to thank our sponsors, of course. We have awesome sponsors that make this show happen. We couldn't do it without them. Of course, Huntington Bank has been with us since day one. I think we're getting close to our 100th episode pretty soon. And from the very beginning, Huntington's been with us. These guys are the region's top SBA lenders as far as that goes. Really glad to have them with us. And of course, we also have Deloitte hanging out with us as well too. Deloitte consultants in town, cannot go wrong with these guys. And they have some awesome thought leadership on their website around all types of things. Some recent stuff I was reading from Deloitte was around smart cities and Internet of Things. So go there and check them out. And Sheets, love these guys. You know, Sheets has been on the technology forefront forever. I think they were some of the first to actually do remote ordering, to actually just go to a kiosk and order your sandwich. And we all know their food is super tasty, but their tech is just as tasty as well too, because their innovation center is now happening here in Pittsburgh. So having Sheets on board with us is super, super cool. So speaking of super cool, Aurora, I do believe is super cool. And Gerardo, you are super cool. I'm so glad you're taking a bit of your Friday to hang out with us today and just get all things going about what's going on with Aurora, because one of these companies that I just think it's really putting Pittsburgh on the map. And some of the work that you guys have done recently, like around our Beyond the Laptops initiative, just blew my mind. So we have much to talk about today. Before we do that, just introduce yourself real fast, Gerardo, and tell us what you're all about and the fact that you came to Pittsburgh from Austin. And when I can tell, you're kind of digging Pittsburgh right now, huh?
Yeah, no, absolutely, Jonathan. Thank you for having me. Thanks for Brian and Audrey and all the incredible work that you guys do at the Technology Council. And I will apologize in advance because in addition to having a dog that barks at anything and everything that moves outside of the windows, I also have 3 kids that may or may not interrupt at some point during our call. But appreciate you guys having me and excited to talk a little bit more about Aurora and our experience here in Pittsburgh. But yeah, as you mentioned, we moved up to Pittsburgh about a year ago. And in fact, we're literally coming on a year here at the end of the month. And we're loving our time here. I spent the last 20 years in Austin working in government and in tech, and decided to join Aurora because I firmly believed in the mission that the company has and the impact that it can have, and was excited about exploring Pittsburgh and having my family have the opportunity to be here and learn a little bit more about this part of the country, but also the incredible work that's happening here with self-driving technology. So happy to go in depth in whatever you want and cover any subjects that folks might be helpful. And honestly, my hope is that you guys will have some questions for me. I hope that this is much more of an interactive conversation and that you guys don't have to listen to me talk the entire time. So I look forward to having a broader conversation.
Absolutely. We have the chat up here, and I encourage everyone to put your questions in the chat. We will try to get to all the questions if at all possible. So I'll be monitoring the chat there as well. Or I'll bring those questions in when they come in as far as that is. And first off, we're just glad you're in Pittsburgh doing what you're doing. So welcome to Pittsburgh. And we're glad you're finding a good time here so far. I know you'll continue to have a great time here in Pittsburgh and everything like that. So maybe just to do a little level set with Aurora, because I mean, Aurora, you guys, you're more than what meets the eye. There's so much going on, the types of technologies that you're developing. It's more than just self-driving cars. It's all about transportation and safety as far as that goes. Maybe give us a quick little tour of Aurora real quick, and then we'll kind of jump into some fun stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, Aurora's, we were started in 2017, right? So we're not that old of a company, but two of our three founders have deep connections here in Pittsburgh. So Chris Urmson, who's our CEO, got his PhD at Carnegie Mellon, spent some time here in Pittsburgh before he went out to California to start Google's self-driving car project, which is now Waymo. Our CTO is Drew Bagnell, who's still here in Pittsburgh. He's still a professor at Carnegie Mellon. He's still very much engaged at the university. In fact, I believe he's still a faculty member there. And he was at Carnegie Mellon and then went on to help build and lead Uber's ATG unit. And then our chief product officer, Sterling Anderson, who was previously at Tesla and led Tesla's Autopilot and the Model X. And he's our chief product officer. So, we are lucky to have 3 founders that have already done this before at different companies. So we get to learn from them, right? So the mission of Aurora is to deliver the benefits of self-driving technology safely, quickly, broadly. And there's 4 key words that we focus there.
Okay.
Number 1, it's about delivering the benefits, right? Like, we don't want to be just another tech company for the sake of building a tech company. But what we're passionate about is the fact that we believe that this technology is truly transformative. And as you mentioned, it's not just about building a self-driving car, but it's the impact that that technology is going to have. So the 3 adverbs are safely, quickly, broadly. For us, safety has to be paramount, right? Like, we will have failed if we do not make our roads safer, if we do not make the experience of drivers safer, if we don't make it safer for kids to cross the street, if we don't make it safer for the movement of goods and the movement of people to happen across all the different systems. And then quickly, because every year in the United States, 40,000 Americans lose their lives, right? And we believe that anything worth doing is worth doing quickly. And so for us, it's about having the focus to be able to focus on that mission and try to bring about this technology as quickly as possible, because we believe that it will literally save people's lives. Yeah. And then the one that I get the most passionate about is broadly. And this is where we get a little bit more into the intricacies of the company. So for us, broadly means 2 things. Number 1, we're a platform agnostic company. So we're not just about putting our technology on a single platform. So for example, the product that we are building is the Aurora Driver. And that is the hardware, the software, the cloud services that can be deployed across a variety of different platforms and make that a self-driving vehicle. So whether it is an e-Golf, an MKZ, a minivan, an SUV, a bus, a shuttle, a commercial vehicle, a Class 8 truck, we are truly agnostic as far as how that technology gets deployed. But what we believe is that our system will benefit from having those data inputs that come from all those different platforms. The other thing that broadly means to us is that we don't want this technology to just be accessible by few, right? Like, we want this technology to be accessible by many across the community. So the way that I think about it and the way that we think about it as a company is, we want a senior citizen who loses their mobility to be able to have this technology to get that back. We want somebody that has a disability that relies on family and friends to get them to work, to be able to have that freedom and the ability to take a job without thinking about how am I going to get there every single time. And then we also think about, the single parent who has to worry about how do I get to work and takes time away from their kids because they have to take 3 different bus routes to get to their job. If we can give that time back to those families, that's a huge impact to their lives. So for us, it truly is about the entire ecosystem, and it's about the movement of people and the movement of goods. So as some of you may have hopefully seen, Aurora announced last year that we were going to be getting more into Class 8 trucking, right? And so that's a huge component. We were talking, in fact, with a state senator earlier this year who's a dairy farmer. And he was talking about how this technology will literally open up markets to dairy farmers here in Pennsylvania that right now they just can't get to because of the hours of service and the limitations of having a human driver behind the wheel. So the impact is very real. And I think it's part of what excites us is that we can see this happen across all of these different platforms.
I'm glad you brought that up. And first off, I'm glad you gave that explanation of Aurora, because like I said, I always see it as self-driving cars. You see the Aurora car going through Pittsburgh, you're like, that's what they're doing. But it's like, no, there's so much more to it. I think you did a great job of showing our audience here that you guys are some deep tentacles across and broad, as you said. Which brings us to our first question from Julia from the Business Times, which talking about autonomous trucking and other types of why was that a priority now to move there? You made headlines of that earlier this week.
Yeah, no, I think a big part of the opportunity that was there for us is when we acquired the LiDAR company in Bozeman, Montana. So we believe that trucking is a huge opportunity. And we've always said, right, that this is not just about the movement of people, but it's about the entire transportation ecosystem. So whether it's, a fleet management company, a logistics company, a ride hailing company, for us, we believe that our expertise is on developing the driver, but we're going to look and identify partners and rely on other organizations that have developed expertise over, some 100 years, right? Like you think about automobile manufacturers, right? Aurora is not building a car, but we are going to partner and rely on the OEMs, the auto manufacturers that have been doing this and that are best in class at what they do. And likewise, you can find similar partners across all of the different modes of transportation and the way that transportation intersects our world. For us, the LiDAR company that we acquired last year is a big part of the component of getting us out on the roads when it comes to trucking, right? Like this technology allows us to see further and to get that information faster for us to be able to feel safe driving on the highways, right? Like some folks will say like highway driving is easier, but the reality is, there's a higher risk when you're driving at those speeds. So for us to be able to see an object at 300 meters and to be able to identify, is that object moving towards us or away from us, and what's the velocity of that object, is a new data that we can get as a result of this LiDAR company that we acquired that made us feel comfortable to go ahead and get into trucking. And we believe that the value is there as well.
Very cool stuff. The questions are pouring in. I love it. We're getting our audience participation. It's on fire right now, and
Awesome.
I see it. So from Eric Sanchez, this may not be quite up your alley, but you might have some insight on this, Roger. So tell me, he wants to know, will batteries be reusable? What is the lifespan of a battery, and how are they being disposed? Is that something that Aurora deals with, or is that just more on the electric car side of things?
I think that would probably be a different question for an auto manufacturer, right? Like for us, again, because we're platform agnostic, like I don't know that we're getting into that.
Gotcha.
We certainly think about it from the perspective of how do we power the systems in these vehicles.
Definitely.
For us, it's about putting the driver on that electric vehicle. And I think that's probably a question that an electric vehicle manufacturer would be able to better answer than I would.
I would agree. Let's jump to our next question here. This is a really good one from John here. He says, I've heard there is a resurgence of interest in personal vehicles due to the current anxiety regarding ride sharing, due to the fear of germs, obviously, and the whole COVID thing. The cost of the systems involved in self-driving vehicles is very high. However, which would indicate it would make sensing in ride sharing scenarios in buses and trucking. What are your comments on that? The idea. And I was a little distracted because my dogs were once again barking their heads outside. Let me get that question to you again. So the cost of the systems involved in self-driving vehicles is very high. However, which would indicate they make more sense in ride-sharing type scenarios. So the idea that it costs a lot to put them into cars people can share, so the cost comes down because people are sharing those.
Yeah, look, I think we would begin by questioning the assumption that everybody will have their own vehicle come, 10, 20, 30 years from now, right? Esurance actually did a really interesting study a couple of years ago. Might have been 2018, I want to say. And what they found was that if you incorporate self-driving into a ride-sharing model, right, where you maybe own a share of a vehicle or you own a part of a fleet of vehicles, but you incorporate the cost savings affiliated with self-driving technology, the average family of four in the United States would save equal to 7 months worth of groceries.
Wow.
And that's a huge impact. And you start to extrapolate that and you start to think about the different economics of distributing some of those costs across multiple families and not having one individual have to take on all of that cost. And the same can be said as you start to think about it, how does it apply to trucking, right? It's not that it's a one-to-one system. And so once you start to think about the cost savings when it's a shared cost, they're actually pretty significant.
Interesting. We've got one more question here. So there's been a big hype behind automated cars for the past 5 years, but regulatory obstacles are difficult to overcome. Are you confident automated trucks will come quicker to the market owing to easier technical challenges?
Oh, so this is right up my alley, right? So yes and no, right? Like it depends. So much of this is regulated by so many different levels of government, right? And it's why we believe as a company, like if you think about tech in general, I think this is a great audience to have this conversation. One of my biggest frustrations with the technology community as a whole, and this is a massive overgeneralization, is that tech's attitude towards government tends to be, stay out of my way. I don't want you guys involved in my stuff. Let me innovate. And I don't want government involved in what I'm doing every day. The problem is at some point, something's going to happen and you're going to want to have those relationships with government. So for us at Aurora, right, like we're a 500 person company, yet we have right now our team, when the government affairs team is 4 of us, right? So we are engaging in building those relationships with government because we don't want government to come to us when they need something. We want to open those doors and have those relationships in place. So to answer the question more directly, there are some components that are overseen by the federal government, some that are state and local, and some that are state and some that are local.
Mm-hmm.
At the federal government, we're working with FMCSA and NHTSA to try to figure out exactly what all those issues are. And then it's a state-by-state issue. Some states will allow you to do, level 4 trucking right now. Other states are going to say, no, you can only do level 2 trucking. And then it also comes down to what are the capabilities of the companies that are doing this work. For us, we believe it is our responsibility to go and prove to government that we are safer than a human driver. And it's not just about working with government on that. It's also about working with the public, right? Like we have to go out and show and prove our business case and our safety case that we believe that our technology is safer than a human driver. And we firmly believe that as an industry, that is our responsibility. So it is important for us to go out and work with all of these different government agencies to ensure that we can deploy this technology in a way that is safe and that it's going to have that positive impact that we believe it will have in communities.
Very cool. Which leads me to my next question. And we don't see a lot of tech companies interacting with their elected officials and with government. It's something they seem to stray away from, as you said. Like we just want to innovate and move forward. But it seems like in this day and age, you really need to have a Gerardo on your team in order to be doing that interfacing as far as it is.
Hopefully they can do it better than me, but yeah, I mean, I think it's really important, right? It's really important to think about communications and public affairs. And, the way that I've always thought about government affairs is that it's part of your risk management portfolio, right? Just as much as almost every single one of your companies has some level of insurance, right? Like having a government affairs team is your insurance against government and against things that are going to pop up in the public that you just want somebody to have and to know where to go and where to address it. And sometimes by having those relationships in place and by building the trust and by building the goodwill ahead of time, you're going to get the benefit of the doubt, right? And there is no amount of value that I can put on when something goes wrong, because inevitably all of us at some point, something's going to happen, and it might not be our fault, right? It might be something that happened to one of our competitors or within the industry, but that all the scrutiny is on everybody else. You want to have those relationships in place so that folks are going to give you the benefit of the doubt that you have the right intentions and that you're doing the right thing before they call you and start asking you questions.
Exactly.
And so to me, the value of building those relationships now before we need something from them is truly invaluable. And we believe that government is a key partner to everything that we do. It's why we work closely with PennDOT and the governor's office. It's why we have a good relationship with Mayor Peduto and Karina at the Department of Transportation, right? Like we believe in building those relationships because we want them to know that they are a key partner to us, and that we understand that the only way that this will succeed is if that relationship exists and if we have that overlap.
Absolutely. So we've got more questions coming in from our audience here. I love the audience participation. And the next question actually was a question I was going to ask you about, and kind of details like how Aurora fits into the ecosystem here in Pittsburgh. And I'm really curious to hear how you answer this. She says, thank you for all your important work that the firm is doing. And she wants to know, is there collaboration between your firm and other firms in the field, such as like Argo and Uber and so forth?
Oh, absolutely, right? Like certainly in the public policy space, right? Like we communicate with all of the other firms on a fairly regular basis when it comes to how we work with the different partners that are here in the community. And certainly from Aurora's perspective, like our entire thesis is based on partnerships, right? So we believe that we are stronger as an industry when we can go to PennDOT or we can go to the mayor's office and say, hey, we have all visited and we believe that this is the best approach that is going to be in the best interest of the community, of the residents, of government, versus having, I'm not a big fan of corporations in general. And this has nothing to do with self-driving companies, but it very much applies to the question. I'm not a big fan of corporations using government to try to build a competitive advantage, right? I don't believe that is good public policy, right? Like you should go and compete in the marketplace and you should go and compete for those customers, but don't use public policy to try to develop a policy that is going to give you an advantage from your competitors from a business perspective. So for us, we believe in working with Argo and Uber and Aptiv, and we're honestly fairly regularly talking to them to make sure that we are working together to understand what is in the best interest of the community, what is in the best interest of our users, because ultimately, we have to earn their trust. And if we start to fight with each other over how it is that we're going to deploy that, we're just going to continue to erode that trust and make it harder for ourselves in the long term.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So our next question, I love these. They're coming from all different directions. This is making this so much fun. It's like random questions for you, Gerardo. So basically, there's an understanding that the current self-driving systems have a hard time operating in the rain and a really hard time operating in the snow. What type of progress is being made regarding dealing with this type of precipitation that we have much of here in Pittsburgh from time to time?
Yeah. So look, a lot of it has to do with testing, right? Like the more that you expose the technology to those different types of weather patterns, the better that the technology is going to get. One thing that I would say is we as a company are very firm believers that it has to be cameras, radar, and LiDAR, right? Like some folks in the industry are trying to do it with not having all three of those components. But for us, those components all play really well against each other, right? Some things may see things better in darkness. Some things may see better in the rain, in the snow. Some things can see at further distance. So for example, I was talking to one of our engineers recently, and radar, right? Like radar does a really good job of bouncing off of metal. And it can identify metal really well, but it may not always see somebody, a human being, in the same way, right? But it can see through rain and snow really easily. Whereas LiDAR can give you a better distance, but even, sometimes the stream of light that comes out of LiDAR may bounce off of a snowflake and come back, which is why there's 600,000 of them that go out, right? So it's about understanding the limitations of each technology. But for us, it's the combination of all of those sensor and all of those data points that is what's going to make the car the safest. So from our perspective, it's really important that we have those three components. And it's why we're committed, and it's why we bought the LiDAR company. Again, coming back to Bozeman.
That third part to it, right?
Yeah. Well, and we had LiDAR before then. This is just a new type of LiDAR that gives us more accurate information when it comes to the velocity and the movement of that object, which beforehand it just took us longer to get.
Gotcha. Another question coming up from Scott Harshman here. He said, you had mentioned about being platform agnostic. Is your R&D looking at applications for other modes of transportation down the road besides highway transportation? No pun intended.
I guess I would follow up a question when you mean like non-highway, right? Like I think for us, it's about
like autonomous planes, maybe like ships, boats.
Yeah, I don't. To be honest with you, I don't know what our engineers are thinking in that regard. I think from our perspective, it really is about the movement of people and the movement of goods. But yes, like we are thinking about roads, and that's what the focus is of the company right now.
Very cool. And the questions keep rolling in, man. I love this. We're filling this whole half an hour up, and it's going to be like we're out of here before we know it. So our next question from Nick, is a convergence of autonomy and smart highway technologies being foreseen?
So this is a chicken or the egg problem, right? Like, yes, there are, so we're talking about vehicle to infrastructure, vehicle to vehicle. We get this conversation a lot. And the thing that we are hesitant about is we do not want to develop this technology and get to the point where we're ready to deploy dependent on something else to happen, right? So if you think about smart highways and smart streets and 5G, right? Like all those things are going to be, we believe are going to be helpful data points in the future. And we're certainly going to want to find ways to leverage them. But we don't want to get into a position where all of a sudden our technology is ready to be deployed and we haven't yet been able to get 5G into a community and therefore our technology can't come there. So are those going to be beneficial for us in the long term? Absolutely. Do we want to build our technology towards dependent on a third party or a third application that we can't control? No. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, no, that I think makes a lot of sense. Let's go to our next question because we're running out of time here and we got some great questions and I'm excited to see. So take a drink of water. Let's get ready to go. So our next question here is, how do you see the global landscape of your industry in other countries? Are we leading the pack or some countries catching up to us or leading in research potentially?
I mean, look, there is definitely a race for this, right? And this is something that we talk about with federal officials all the time, that the United States needs to continue to maintain its leadership in this space, but that if we are not careful and if we do not continue to allow for the deployment of this technology, there are certainly other countries that are going to try to surpass us. Depending on the regulatory atmosphere across many other countries, some in Europe, some in Asia, right? Like they are looking to find ways to bring this technology into their communities and to allow the players that are currently designing this technology in their own countries to deploy faster and to prove the impact in those countries. So while I believe that the United States is still currently leading in this space, we certainly have to continue to work together to figure out how do we create a path for deployment and how do we create a path for commercialization in order to maintain that leadership position. It's not something that we can sit on our laurels and think that in 10 years we'll still be leaders if we don't create those paths.
And what I love about it is that Pittsburgh is at the tip of the spear on this. And
100%.
that's just so freaking cool, man. I love it. We've got another question here. So we want to know, how do you anticipate consumers and transportation firms to invest in automated vehicles? Will that mean vehicles will come at a higher cost? Will clients be willing to pay the extra cost? Or are you more planning on scaling down the cost of the technology over the years?
You know, it's probably going to be in all of the above, right? Like I don't know that anybody has figured out exactly what is going to be the one business model. And I don't know that there's going to be a single business model, right? I think auto manufacturers may have one business model, ride sharing companies may have another business model, transit organizations may have another business model. I think the advantage of having so many different modes of transportation that can adopt this technology is that you'll end up finding that there are going to be multiple different business models as the price continues to come down, right? Like as we can build this at scale, the price of LiDAR and the price of the technology that is necessary to make this happen will go down. But I think the business models that are going to be created to deploy the technology it's not going to be just one. Right. I think there's going to be multiple options for folks to access this technology. And I think that's exactly what everybody's trying to figure out is what are the best points of entry into the market and to better understand what are the business models that will make sense, the most sense to consumers.
Very cool. So my next question, this is coming from me, is
Yeah.
I'm just curious, so how can we keep Pittsburgh on the leading edge? I feel like we've had such a head start in this. We have all these assets in place. And like you mentioned before, around the world, people are nipping at our heels here. How do we stay ahead?
Yeah, I think one, it's being able to continue to advocate with the different stakeholders in the community about the value of self-driving technology, right? Like it's one thing for us as an industry to go to government, to go to the different stakeholders who care about this issue and advocate on our behalf. But honestly, you all as tech leaders in the community have so much more influence and so much more power when you go and talk about what this means for Pittsburgh, what it means for the community to be able to be that tip of the spear, Jonathan. Like, as you mentioned, Pittsburgh is truly leading in this space. And it's not an exaggeration to say that governments from across the country, from cities to states to the federal government, are looking at Pittsburgh and at PennDOT to understand how is it that the relationship between the city and industry and the state and industry work for the deployment of this technology. So I think that there's an opportunity here to continue to showcase that, but I think it's going to be important for the broader community to also be pushing that narrative, because it can't always come from us. Like it will look too self-serving for us to go out there and continue to talk about how we believe self-driving technology is great. Of course we believe self-driving technology is great. But I think by having others do the same thing, it starts to feel like this is more of a community effort and not just a self-interested corporation coming in and telling government officials why we believe self-driving technology should be here in Pittsburgh to stay.
Absolutely. So we got about a minute left and we got a couple more questions. We can get to these really quickly and we got to wind it down because Audrey's always very good maintaining a sharp line here. So first question is, how does Aurora work with traditional automakers like GM or Mac? And the other question is around, do you see Aurora having to work with other governments like Canadian and Mexican governments in order to, be part of their standards and so forth? as we
Yeah.
begin?
So look, absolutely. We have partnerships with different auto manufacturers, and we certainly expect to continue to work with them directly. The Aurora driver is not something that we foresee where you buy it off the shelf at a store and you go and install it on a car. Like, no, we believe in the partnership model where we will work with the auto manufacturer to make sure that the sensors are all in the right spots on the different platforms that we work with. A transit company, Class 8 trucks, like same thing, right? So those partnerships we certainly expect to continue. And as far as working with other governments, absolutely, right? Any community that we see ourselves going into, and earlier this week we announced an office in Dallas, Fort Worth, in Texas. We're going to be working closely with the government. We're going to be building those relationships and hopefully duplicating some of the great work that we've done here in Pittsburgh across communities, hopefully across the world.
Well, Gerardo, we want you staying here in the Pittsburgh office, not going to the Dallas office.
No, I'm staying in the Pittsburgh office. Are you kidding me? You know how hot it is in Texas right now? No way.
That is true. I'm glad to hear that. I can't thank you enough for taking time to answer all these questions today. This was truly one of our fast and furious issues of business as usual. It was so much fun getting all this feedback from the audience today. Got to thank our sponsors, Sheets, Deloitte, and Huntington Bank for making this happen. I want to remind everybody, on Monday, we have a really cool business as usual. We're celebrating the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disability Act. We have some folks from Carnegie Mellon and some other folks coming and talking about assistive technologies, and also talking about what else needs to be done to make sure that everybody has access. So Gerardo, once again, have an awesome weekend and a great Friday, and thanks for being part of business as usual. You are the best.
Thanks. Looking forward, and thanks for having us.
Absolutely. And thank you everybody for taking part of your Friday and learning all about Aurora with us. This is Jonathan Kirsten with the Tech Council. Hope everyone's cool.
Thanks, everyone.